Let's head overseas again now, and Syrian government forces have taken control of the northwestern city of Idlib after days of clashes with rebel fighters.
Security forces are reportedly carrying out house-to-house searches in the area, and refugees are crossing the border into Turkey. For more, we're joined in the studio by Doctor Ben Macqueen, who's a senior lecturer in politics at Monash University. Good morning to you. It's 1 year on since this fighting started in Syria. Any chance that there is going to be any kind of resolution soon?
Pardon me, a resolution in some form will emerge. It's not going to be a peaceful transition. I think this is something that's pretty patently obvious. The capturing of Idlib, the sort of forced removal of opposition forces from Bab el-Amr and Homs, and we're also seeing increasing divisions within the SNC in recent weeks. These things point to the government gaining a bit more of, I guess, a tactical upper hand. But there are also fractures on the government side. We've seen sort of allegations of these emails coming out in The Guardian recently of regime indifference to what's going on and these sorts of things. So we're going to see some sort of greater concession from the government, but that's going to have to be forced by, I see, sort of greater unrest and unfortunately great violence.
The regime is only going to go so far, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
On the concession front.
Yeah, the concessions offered in the referendum recently and then the lead up to these parliamentary elections are quite minimal. We've got, the most significant change in it is this introduction of a multi-party, at least sort of ostensibly a multi-party system. But the President still has the power to choose the Prime Minister, to veto any legislation. The Parliament, whilst it might have a different face, still is in a lot of ways a rubber stamp institution. It's hard to see how much further that the regime is going to go beyond that, because it will then be ceding actual control over to a body. So the unpredictability of that is just something that the regime can't stomach. And
the UN Arab League envoy Kofi Annan has received a response from the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. What was in the contents of that?
The detail of that is still a bit opaque. I mean, he's been talking about concrete proposals. The sense I get is that they were really reiterations of the reforms offered in the referendum, a promise to talk further with certain opposition elements, but not naming those elements. So it's hard to see if there was anything actually specific that Annan could hook onto, and I got the sense from Annan's comments afterwards that there wasn't really much grist in those promises, but he also walked away quite disillusioned from his talks with the SNC as well. So it's been informative for the UN Special Envoy, but I don't think it's been terribly heartening for him.
Really, and we have covered this issue now in its latest iteration for weeks now, but it seems like Groundhog Day. We have more fighting to report every morning, government forces taking ground, rebel forces taking ground, and still inaction on the United Nations front. So we're looking at the long term, the big picture, Ben. Where do you think it's going to end?
I still think it's very much characterised by this dynamic of a regime that's too strong to fall in the short to medium term, but too weak to really sort of have a full military sort of counter-offensive against the opposition. So again, it's that unfortunate cycle of violence that's going to continue. In the long term, I can't see the regime in its current form surviving. What the regime might do in the long term, as happened in a number of other countries through the 80s and 90s in the region, was to, for instance, divorce itself from the single party. The Assad family might try to distance itself, as happened in Algeria. The party itself might try to distance itself from the inner circle of the regime around Assad and his sort of close coterie of friends. Some dynamic like that might slip into a bit more of a pluralist system is probably a best case scenario, I think, at this stage.
Ben Macqueen, thanks for your time this morning.
Pleasure.
Thank you.